Let's begin with some notes. A rhetorical analysis essay attempts to explain the rhetorical choices a writer makes. It's one of the 3 free response questions on the AP Lang exam, and you're given a passage that's usually persuasive and asked to analyze the writer's rhetorical choices. The recommended time for writing this essay is 40 minutes. What makes this essay easy relative to the others is that it doesn't require much creativity. Unlike the other 2 essays, which are argument-based and you have to come up with arguments off the top of your head, the rhetorical analysis essay gives you all the information you need right there in front of you. You just have to interpret it. Also, your U.S. history knowledge should help you better understand the rhetorical situation. So by the time you get around to taking your AP exams, you should have this broader understanding of U.S. history, and that should help you better dive into the situation of whatever text you're given on the AP Lang Q2. And finally, the way you organize your Q2 is really going to be the same every time. So once we find an established pattern of organizing the essay, you can just do that every single time. On the other hand, what makes this essay difficult when compared to the other 2? Well, you've got a passage to read, and you're on a strict timer. So reading the passage properly, as in multiple times, that takes precious time out of your 40 minutes. You also have to be able to see the subtleties and nuance within a text in order to score well, which means you have to have really high critical reading and writing skills as well. Lastly, this is the kind of essay that you absolutely cannot fake. If you don't know what rhetoric is, if you don't understand how to analyze rhetorical choices, there's no way you can just kind of fake your way through it. We covered my method for rhetorical analysis in a previous lesson. Step 1, read the text for comprehension. Step 2, analyze the rhetorical situation. Step 3, read the text for rhetorical techniques. Step 4, analyze intended effects and rhetorical constraints. And Step 5, connect to supporting purposes. These 5 steps comprise the brainstorming and planning phases of the essay. When it comes time to compose the essay itself, you'll need to write an introduction that discusses the rhetorical situation of the text, a thesis statement at the end of the introduction that establishes the rhetorical choices you will examine in the body of your essay, a body made up of 3 or 4 paragraphs which examine different rhetorical choices in the text, and a conclusion which reiterates your thesis, recaps your analysis, and concludes with a final commentary on the effectiveness of the rhetoric. It's now time to pause the video to complete the following exercise, which asks you to read a provided rhetorical analysis essay and respond to some questions about it. Respond to those questions and then unpause this video as I go over some sample responses. The first question asks, what is the essay's thesis? Well, we can find that exactly where we expect it to be at the end of the introduction paragraph. In this particular analysis essay, the thesis reads, in her speech, Kelly attempts to stir her audience into helping her end the abusive child labor system in America through the use of overwhelming data, appeals to pity and shame, and reasoning that converts her cause into a moral imperative for the audience. You can see with this thesis statement that it has clearly identified the writer's primary purpose and then highlighted the 3 different rhetorical techniques that the essay will analyze in its body paragraphs. Question 2 asks, what rhetorical technique does the first body paragraph analyze? Well, we can find that in the topic statement of the first body paragraph, which says, Kelly begins her speech by opening her audience's eyes with overwhelming data on child labor in America. So you could say the technique here is overwhelming data. And this is a logos technique, of course. Number 3, what does the paragraph explain or the intended effects of the technique on the audience? So after the text evidence, here we have the explanation of effects by pointing out the sheer number of children already in the workforce and implying that they will take up a greater number of percentage. Kelly is not only introducing her audience to the issue, but also attempting to shock them into realizing just how serious the issue is. So those are the effects there, to introduce her audience to the issue and shock them into realization. The explanation of effects go on there by saying that the multiple examples are designed to help her audience see how widespread the issue is. So it's kind of three different effects that the writer's trying to go for there. Number 4, what rhetorical obstacle does the paragraph connect to those effects? Well, it says towards the end of that first body paragraph that the activists in Kelly's audience are likely from middle and upper class households. And so that's kind of the rhetorical obstacle here, is the fact that there's a gap between the audience's experiences and the sort of things that the writer's talking about here, because her audience are not the kind of people who are directly affected by this issue. Lastly, number 5, do the technique, effects, and obstacles all rely on the same means of persuasion? Meaning, do they all line up? Are they all logos, all ethos, all pathos? Yes, they do. And that's something that you have to do in your analysis to make sure that your analysis is focused. It starts off by identifying a very specific logos-based technique. The explanations are all logos-based effects, talking about how helping the audience realize things or understand things. That's the realm of logos. And then it's tied to a specific logos-based obstacle, the fact that the audience is unaware of these things. Moving on to the second body paragraph, what is the rhetorical technique there? Well, the topic statement says that Kelly attempts to open her audience's hearts to the plight of the children with appeals to pity and shame. So the techniques there are appeals to pity and shame. And those, of course, are pathos techniques. Number 7, what does the paragraph explain are the intended effects? Well, the appeals to pity and shame, it's pretty obvious what the intended effects are, but you would never just want to say that it creates pity, it creates shame. You always want to talk about who the target of the emotion is and how the emotion is triggered, that sort of thing. And so here the writer of this essay explains that Kelly attempts to evoke pity for the children in her audience's hearts, and also to shame her audience for their complicit approval of this by purchasing these goods. They're kind of participating in the system. So those are the intended effects there. What about the obstacle? What obstacle is being connected here? Well, here it says the appeal to pity is designed to overcome her audience's lack of emotional attachment. So kind of similar to that first paragraph, the audience had this lack of awareness. Now she's trying to overcome the audience's lack of emotional attachment to the issue. For much the same reasons as before, the audience is clearly disconnected since none of them have had to send children into the workforce before. So that's the obstacle there. Finally, do the technique, effects, and obstacle all line up? Yes, they're all pathos-based. Pathos-based techniques, pathos effects that are explained here, then a pathos-based obstacle here that the audience doesn't feel any particular way for the children. They're apathetic to the issue, so it's overcome with a pathos appeal. And finally, looking at that third body paragraph, what is the technique here? Well, Kelly creates a moral imperative that links her cause with the cause the audience is already fighting for. So we could just call that technique creating a moral imperative, something like that. That's a good noun phrase to use to identify this technique. What about the intended effects? Well, she links her cause to her audience's cause and makes it ethically imperative that they participate, because it's not just a cause for helping someone. It is now like ethically necessary because they're the only ones that can stop it. And so that's what she's trying to help the audience realize, that their cause first of all, that their cause for suffrage is necessary to help free these children from these horrible situations. So that's the effects there. Then finally, the obstacle. Okay. The obstacle here is pretty clear, that the audience does not first realize that the two issues are connected. And so again, she's trying to connect them together. Do all those techniques line up? Yes, they are all logos-based. We've got a logos-based technique, logos effects, and a logos obstacle, that the audience doesn't realize something.